Thank you, Ruggero, and thank you all for inviting me. I'm so happy for being here, and I heard a lot of very interesting things in the last 2 days and today. So this is my presentation. I hope that you can see it. I would like to develop some considerations starting from my last book, Ecology of Media, Ecology of Media Manifesto for Gentle Communication. And first of all, let me define the field of my analysis. The term ecology of media is a classical term for McLuhan tradition, and probably you remember the ecology of media written by Neil Postman some decades ago. My perspective is a bit different. I don't want to spend too much time in order to say to tell the differences, but I hope that you can recognize them. First of all, what does ecology of media mean? I think there are two different meanings. Both of them coming from our experience in ecology, in general ecology. The first one is the meaning of ecology as a science, a good description, a scientific description of the environment as a complex ecosystem. The stage of development of, for instance, the global warming and so on. What is important is the scientific description. What does it mean for a media scholar? Give a good scientific description of the stage of development of media, in particular of the platforms today, which implies some more problem in order to understand and in respect to the traditional media. The first is that all the platforms present the same traditional complexity of the media. They're not only information, for instance, but also entertainment, culture, commodification of cultures and on behaviors of people, and so on. The second one is that the platforms are not only media. There are more and more. They are banks, companies for booking holiday or cars. They are secretary. They are a lot of things different from the traditional media, but in some way interrelated because they work in the same way. Both if they are traditional media, information and so on, both if they are something more. And third, the complexity, this complexity is growing, and the change in the platform is very quick. Second one, second meaning, an ecological approach is not only a scientific approach, it is also an agency. We have to take care of our planet, and we have to take care about media and communication too. The environmentalism is oriented toward protecting the physical environment. Think about the global warming, how we can act in order to change the situation, to govern the situation, and for the media, how to govern the effect of media on people, how to govern the access to information, for instance. Which is interesting because in some way the media governance is legitimized by the idea of the protection of the quality of symbolic universe. If you want to protect the fight against fake news is in name of the quality of communication. The fight against verbal violence, again, is about that. And this means that for having an ecology of media, we have to consider an ecology of communication in general. What is a good communication? Consider the fact that at the beginning of the internet, the first discussion groups were yet oriented by netiquette, starting from the consideration that without netiquette, it would be impossible to have a good communication, a good virtual community. So we can say in some way that as Chancellor said yesterday, without communication it's impossible to build a society. And also that communication is a sort of natural resource specific of humanity. Why? Because we are the only species thinking the past and the future of our generations. We receive communication from the past. We let communication and text and documents and monuments for the future. We are able to think a kind of communication which implies not the presence of the other, but an original openness of the other. That's the way of sharing. There is a very good book, Social Media, written by Graham Michael. He says in 2016, I think, he says, okay, what is for a good communication is sharing. Sometimes in the platforms means selling. Okay, it's a very different thing. So you have to protect the idea of a dialogical structure of the communication, which is not a conversational structure, it's a dialogical one. Okay, more implying the role of people and the openness to the other. So we have to save, saying so, the body and the soul. I would like to specify that with a comparison, a little comparison. Some years ago, I wrote a little essay about the media and the information in the Laudato Si, and I compared the use of term media and communication in Laudato Si and the same terms in the very famous Agenda for Sustainable Development. And which is absolutely interesting because for the sustainable agenda, what we have to do is make the media grow, grant the access to information in the sense of the access to the content. And this is, in some way, you have the impression that for the agenda, this is sufficient in order to establish a better communication. And Pope Francis says, always in the Laudato Si, you see the quote there. Okay, media and information are not enough. What is important is the quality of communication. It's not important to say, it's important to say the truth. It's not important to speak to talk with the other. It's important to consider the other like another self. Okay, very briefly, I have really not so much time. Okay, which is the situation for the first part of the ecology?
Exactly, you have 10 minutes, so
exactly. Okay, I run. okay, the ecosystem of platforms, which is the phase we are facing now. I think very briefly that for in the last 5 or 10 years, the platforms were growing, but on the other side, there were critics elements in the growth. Today, with the pandemic, something is changing. In some way, I have the impression that the pandemic crisis is accelerating the change. You know very well that when we talk about the growth of the platforms, we are speaking about a complex situation, because the platform, sometimes we speak about platforms like, for instance, populism is strictly linked to the platforms, is a more complicated situation. Concentration and unequal distribution of wealth, spread of populism, diffusion of different model of internet after the utopia of the unique internet at the time of Tim Berners-Lee, and the crisis of welfare are part of the same historical situation, or the same social situation. It's difficult to think the platforms outside of this complex situation. Some data, the concentration of the platforms here, the increasing inequality in the world, not only in the West world. You can see China, United States, and Europe. The spread of populism in the last 30 years, and in particular, in the last 15 years. The rise of illiberal democracies in the world, which is a contradiction with the free access to the network, obviously, and the complex articulation of the internet, with the famous 3 different internet, no? The model, the USA model, the European model, and the Chinese one. And the role of neoliberalism in shaping the welfare and putting the welfare in crisis and so on. So what's the point now? But I think that some things are changing. Since some year, and in particular after the Biden rise to the presidency, we start to talk about minimum tax. In Europe, we have the web tax. In Italy, for instance, there we can register a bit slowdown in populism, and a relaunch of public policies and the welfare after the pandemic. There were a lot of different situations. We know very well that after the Brexit, USA presidential election of Trump, the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and so on, we were more aware of the dangers of the social media and the platforms. But there were also social issues, problems of job regulation, threat for intellectual profession. Think about law and jurisprudence and digitalization of jurisprudence, of digitalization of education. The idea of Google to offer a sort of university for digital profession, and so on. Cultural issues like violence, post-truth, and so on. So I think that now we have a new model of interaction between institutions and platforms on the other side, a negotiating model because the pandemic make inequalities increase. The access is a problem of growing inequality. If you have no access to platforms or to internet, you can't receive your education, for instance, in the situation of pandemic. The role played by information for health is very important. If you receive fake information about, it's a problem of health for you. And so what is important now is the new sensitivity for quality of communication. Okay. I think that now we have two different ways to face this change. And we have to follow both of them in some way. The first is the new governance approach, a sort of ecology of media and platforms. But the second one is the educational role that civil society can play in the next few years. Let me explain with an example. The example of the fight against fake news. The European Union and European Commission, during the pandemic, I studied very in-depth the institutional discourses of the institutions like European Union during the pandemic. And definition, for instance, of infodemic, which is a very interesting thing. I have no time to explain, but they decided to have a sort of agreement in order to protect the health of citizens, of European citizens. They make an agreement and they ask platforms to contrast, to fight the fake news. Is a model of negotiation, which poses a lot of problems also. Because it's difficult, as I said yesterday, it's difficult to distinguish sometimes between an extremely difficult position and the real fake news and the real denialism. Sometimes it's difficult to do. And so we know very well the problem of algorithms and for instance, on Facebook with the governance of the pedophilia in Facebook, and sometimes they block historical images like Napalm Girl, for instance, which is strange. Huh? so is the problem of when we ask algorithm to produce a sort of governance, automatic governance. So this is the first one. I would like to share with you this kind of approach, which is made by an association made by intellectual citizens, universities, and so on in Italy. It calls Parole Ostili. Harsh words is the translation, but also words or styles is a game, and they produce a sort of a big education project about the violence, verbal violence, and fake news. It's a long path, but it's a very important to follow. So we can have two different ecological logics in order to contrast the limits of communication. Conclusions. What is important in our perspective? First of all, maintain an overall vision. Media and evolution, not only in technical way, but more in general, in the social complexity, and follow the development of the media in that kind of approach. Second one, pay attention not only to policies and to politics, but also to that regard the media, but more in general, the risk of impoverishment of communication. And third and last, always considering the universal nature of communication as a human resource. Gentle communication means to considering all humanity like a family, gens, the traditional family in Latin meaning. All the humanity is our gens. This is the reason why we need a gentle communication. Thank you so much for your attention.